This is the Conscious Hour.
Now we're talking about Lebanon and the massive genocide that the Israelis are doing, just like they did in Gaza, taking entire city blocks down, just totally leveling them.
Killed Nasrallah and flattened multiple high-rise buildings, and it is continuing to carry out attacks there every day and ordered residents of the area to leave their homes, just as Israel has done in vast areas in most of Gaza. What is the situation there now? You say that it's your second home in terms of you're going there frequently. I remember visiting the Dahia quite a few years ago. What have you been seeing there now?
Well, now there are over 1 million Lebanese displaced by Israel attacks on the south and the Dahia and other areas of Lebanon. But Israel's killing now on average 100 Lebanese a day. There's nearly 1,800 martyrs so far. Like you said, they're bringing down entire residential buildings on top of people in the Dahia, and those being made to flee are sleeping in the streets with nothing more than what little provisions they could carry with them. The Dahia is a poor area. I say Haifa bas fi hayat, like it's a poor neighborhood, but there's life. Very humble, very respectable, very resilient people. And when I go and speak to them, it's comforting to hear how strong they are despite what's going on. Israel has been following the Gaza formula by trying to say, we're giving you warning before you have to leave everything, and then we're going to bomb your entire neighborhood, bombing near Al-Zahra hospital the other day, bombing near pharmacies, kindergartens in the Dahia. This is a very densely populated area. So whenever they're doing their so-called precision strikes, they are aiming to maim, kill, and debilitate the entire surrounding areas in the suburb. And I've seen it with my own eyes after they hit Harat Tahrik. So it's very horrifying, but despite this, speaking to my people every day has only made me realize how resilient the people of the Dahia truly are, and the people of the South. There was an interview with one woman who was displaced from her village who said that while her displacement is weighing heavy on her, and while she's sleeping on the streets now, she's seen what's happening to the people of Gaza who are dying hungry, she said, and she's willing to continue on this path and to even die on this path, so long as they stop the genocide in Gaza. And as a Southern Lebanese woman, it pains me to see my people leaving their villages, huddled together in their cars or laying on the roads. But I cannot tell you how proud I am that we answered the call when the world stood silent. And my mother once said something to me that this is a bitter drink that we're being forced to consume, but we will drink it together.
Says so much. You mentioned that there have been about 1 million people displaced from their homes. That's about 1/5 of the country's population. Tens of thousands are entering Syria. Some of them were refugees from the Syrian civil war who are now going back to Syria because they're being displaced from Lebanon. How are people coping with such an enormous humanitarian challenge?
They're sharing this bitterness and the misery with each other. They're opening their homes. The cafe that I frequent, the owner couldn't stand seeing all of these families sleeping right in front of his cafe. And he told them, come every day, you'll eat here on my dime, and every night you'll sleep here. And I don't want to hear anything other than you'll accept it. People are helping one another. Our hospitals have been hit tremendously by what Israel did before even beginning the killings in the South. During the attacks, the communications device attacks. Now you have to wait if you're looking for non-emergency services, but everyone is doing their part. We're all banding, together, because the only way out of this is by standing strong and firm, because we're now in the eye of the storm, in my opinion. And the only way that we will survive is by holding even tighter to the rope of resistance for one another. And I will tell you that Israel is fighting against the people that fear humiliation more than death. And you can't defeat people like this. They killed Sayyid Hassan, and they ended up inflaming the hearts of countless more who've taken up a struggle that he spent, 3 decades pursuing. So this isn't the end by any means. The occupation is going to end, and it will end in our arena and on our terms.
Ruqayya, I want to talk about the South, which is where you're from. But before I do that, I want to tell you just a little story about my own. I've been to the South a couple of times, but the first time I went was, I think it was in June of 2000. And this was just weeks after the liberation of the South from more than 2 decades of brutal Israeli occupation. And I visited the South with friends from the South. And I remember just, it was stunning. I remember we went up to Israeli military outposts that were high on top of hills that looked out over the beautiful, rugged, mountainous landscape of the South. And you could tell they had just fled. I remember seeing like cans of food that were still there, clothes that were still there. They looked like they had just upped and ran away. We went to Khiam prison, the torture camp that was originally built by French colonialists, and we were given tours of the cells by former prisoners who told us of the horrors that they had experienced there at the hands of Israel and the South Lebanon Army collaborators, the Lebanese version of the Palestinian Authority, if you like. And I remember seeing the torture chamber with the electrical wires attached to car batteries and attached to wall outlets that Israel used. What I remember most was the joy of people in the South, people streaming home from Beirut, who had been displaced for many years, welcoming us. It was just a celebration. And this was already about 3 or 4 weeks after the liberation. And there was a feeling that it had just happened yesterday. So I just, for me personally, that experience was what made me believe liberation is possible. Because the context at the time, the political context in Palestine was of the Oslo Accords and this endless process and the Palestinian Authority becoming, the proxy for Israel. And then you had South Lebanon, which was just pure liberation and the joy and ecstasy of liberation. And that made me believe we'll see it, not just in Lebanon, but in Palestine too. I wanted to share that.
No, I'm glad you shared that. I'm so glad you got to visit our southern villages, because the fragrance of life in the South is very different than anywhere else. And yes, I might be biased, but I feel like I can breathe whenever I'm back in South Lebanon. It's where the one village, Nita, they say it's where heaven meets earth. Our village of Arab Salim is very close to the mountain. And we have 2 villages that are our family villages. The other one's very close to the border. When you are there, it is as if you were alone with whatever creator you worship or whatever you have inside your soul. It is beyond anything imaginable. I have been taught the meaning of life because of my upbringing as a Southern Lebanese person. And dignity. It's something I've said before, is that in the South, dignity is our currency, which is something our occupier will never understand.
And, I remember another thing. Some people who are a little older, it's hard for me to believe how many years ago it was, because to me it seems like yesterday. But the great Edward Said had gone to the South right after the liberation. Many people had gone to visit. And the Israelis had fled along with their collaborator army. I mean, it was literally, nobody expected that Israel would just flee the way it did. It was incredible. Right. And so there was no border fence. There was no fortifications. There was just this little wire fence. And in some places there was no fence. And the Israeli houses were literally right up to the border because they had controlled the whole South for decades. So for them, it was all quote unquote Israeli territory. And I remember this one point we reached where there was a ridge. And the ridge was on the Israeli side of the line. And there were actually Israeli tanks up on the ridge. And then below the ridge, on the Lebanese side, there was one Hezbollah soldier. Just one. And it was just like he was standing there in the open. And the reason he was there, and they were stationed along the fence, was to protect the people coming, to make sure they wouldn't get too close to the Israelis and then be harmed. But what was so striking was that those Israeli tanks were right there. The Israeli soldiers were right there, and none of them would have dared to touch or to fire at this soldier from Hezbollah. And again, to me, that's something I'll never forget, because it underscored the strength of the resistance in the South. Talk about what you think is happening there now. We've seen the battles already today. How are people in the South going to, they're going through this again after all the decades of occupation they faced. Are they going to be able to do it?
Yes, they absolutely will. And I'm saying this with full confidence because of our history. There are people who have chosen to stay, members of my family. Some have left because they have children. Others, whenever Israel was bombing Arab Salim, they also bombed it today. They killed a family of 3. But whenever they were bombing a week ago, some of my relatives all went to one relative's house and stayed together because they would rather die all together than be separated. Some are choosing to stay, knowing that this might happen because it's more dignified to die on your land this way, and they refuse to leave. Other people have left. And then, just so people understand what we've been through, there are people in the South who have rebuilt their homes multiple times. And when you go and speak to them, I've interviewed countless Southern Lebanese people. They said, my house might go, but it's worth it. Are we any better than Gaza? And not just that, this is for the sake of our liberation and our freedom. And I will rebuild, and I'm going to rebuild even better. Our people are truly just steadfast in a way that cannot ever be quantified. So we're witnessing this firsthand by the men of Hezbollah who are fighting the IDF, one of the most well-armed military groups in the world, and they're defeating them before they even come inside South Lebanon. Because as I said, this is our arena now. They've entered our territory. They cannot defeat a people like this who do not fear death and who fear humiliation more than anything else on this earth. So yes, we will be victorious. And we're going to see a liberation day for Palestine, just as we did for South Lebanon.
So in reflection of what, I have tears in my eyes, avarice and greed, that's who the U.S. is. We're the cruelest nation in the world, along with our allies of Britain, Germany, and France. It's the Zionists. It's not the American people. We've been taken over a long time ago by a military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, and now we're feeling the pain. The world's feeling the pain. How does it end? Well, arrest Netanyahu, put him in prison, try him. It's all over. But we won't, because the Western Alliance, which is the Zionist movement that controls our government, has a greater mission to basically steal all the land in that, what they call the West Asia, and make it into Israel so the West, can control all the profits being made instead of the people of the region. It's the conscious hour. We've all had enough. At 72 years old, I've had enough of the lies and deception of our politicians, our presidents, and our military leaders.